Welcome to our webinar for data contributors. So my name is Callan. I am your host of this webinar, and I'm also your data contact. I have very likely been in contact with everybody attending this webinar sometime in the last year. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for our exclusive event for you as data contributors. We're coming to you from Port McNeill, where we are privileged to work and learn in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Kwakwala-speaking peoples. We acknowledge that what we are speaking on today rests on millennia of knowledge gained from those whose territories we will be referencing. This is MERS's first exclusive webinar for data contributors, and the purpose of this is to value you and to provide an opportunity to come together and share with you how your data contributes directly to MERS research, education, and conservation. Before we get too far into things, I'm just going to cover some technical support. Please use the Q&A feature of the webinar as questions come up for you throughout the call, and we will be answering those at the end. We are recording this webinar, and the recording will be available for 1 week for data contributors after the webinar finishes today, and you will receive a follow-up email at the end with a link to that recording. So who is presenting today? We've got a lineup of us from MERS that will be sharing some information with you today. Starting with myself, I'm Callan Holder. Again, I'm your host of this, and I'm also your data contact. So again, I'm the face behind the data email address currently. My official title with MERS is Research and Education Assistant. And again, I do the chunk of data processing as well. When I'm not doing data processing, I can also be found operating MERS's research vessel, the Megaptera, as in that photo. We've got the one and only Jackie Hildering. She is MERS's co-founder and Education and Communications Director. And we also have Dr. Felicia Vachon, who is MERS Research Coordinator. And unfortunately, Nicole Doe is sick today, and we will be missing her on this call. But she's not only MERS's Director of Operations, but she's also the coordinator of the Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration, which Jackie, Felicia, and I will be doing our best to fill in for Nicole a bit later on in this presentation and tell you a little bit more about the CPHC. Our agenda of this event today, so starting off, I'll be covering why we're having this event and a look into some of our 2024 data contributions and highlights from this past year. Moving on to the history of cataloging and how cataloging of humpback whales is done in BC will be covered by Jackie. Next, Felicia will be presenting on MERS research and your data contributions. And then moving on to the big picture and how your data feeds into the further efforts across the province and the Pacific will be covered. What it was to be covered by Nicole, but that will be myself, Felicia, and Jackie filling in there. And because Jackie can't stop talking, she's going to continue with the additional value of your data contributions before we all discuss questions at the end. Questions will be covered by all of us, and please, once again, use the Q&A as we go throughout the webinar before we summarize and close at the end. So let's dive in. Why? Why are we here and having an exclusive event for data contributors? Pardon me. This webinar is MERS's way of saying thank you as data contributors, because we acknowledge that this takes time, effort, and dedication, and we really want you to know just how valuable this is. You are adding to what is known about the whales and very significantly expanding the number of sightings of individual whales, the geographic range, knowledge of social associations, calves, injuries, and MERS could never collect all of this data alone. When you share your data with MERS, it makes use of your existing presence on or near the water without needing to add additional resources and impacts such as noise, fossil fuels that would need to go into the environment if it were somebody else or us continuing to collect this data. When you share information about who the whales are, it amplifies the gains for conservation, education, and research, and it really increases the importance of knowing and caring about who the whales are as individuals. And we so often say it takes a really large community of people who care to work for the whales. So this is our way of saying thank you. Just to go over what MERS's data processing zone is, again, everybody on this call has contributed data from this area, but also from outside of this area. So I just want to talk about what that looks like. The MERS data processing zone extends from the upper Strait of Georgia, which includes sort of the Hornby, Denman Island area, all the way up the central coast to just past Bella Bella, and then down around the northwest coast of Vancouver Island down to Tofino. So this is the area where if you have a humpback whale sighting anywhere in that blue zone, that's going to come directly to MERS, and we will do the cataloging efforts and the processing of that data. But also thank you to people who have sent in data from outside of this area, because it's allowed us to share your data with the respective organization that's doing cataloging efforts in other areas across BC. This brings us back to the Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration that we'll be speaking more on a bit later on. So with that in mind, here are some of our 2024 humpback highlights in the MERS data processing zone specifically. So in addition to MERS data collection and absolutely with data still to be processed, these are some of our highlights so far from 2024. There were a total of 252 individual humpbacks sighted in 2024 in the MERS zone. We had 22 first-year calves as well. One new trap feeder, bringing the total now to 35 known trap feeding humpback whales. If you're unfamiliar with what trap feeding is, what that is as a feeding strategy, please do ask questions on it, and Jackie will be thrilled to tell you about it at the end to elaborate a bit more on this really unique feeding strategy of humpback whales. So far, we've got over 1,600 sightings in 2024 in our database and still counting. So this will only increase as we continue to get through more data from the past year. And we also have 41 previously undocumented whales. So you might be wondering what that means. And just to elaborate on that, we have 31 of the 41 humpback whales have never been documented before. So whether they have been in BC waters before, there was no formal official catalog recognition documentation of them, meaning that they are now have now been documented and are new. So 31 new individuals in 2024, and then 10 of the 41 humpback whales have been documented before, but not in the MERS data processing zone. So for example, there might have been an individual humpback whale that has spent time in the lower Salish Sea, but had never been documented in MERS data processing zone prior to 2024. And lastly, while it's not a humpback highlight per se, we couldn't have a lot of these without data contributors such as yourself. So we have over 150 of you as data contributors in 2024, playing a key part in the data collection of these highlights. This also gives a bit of insight into the human management behind this as well. We really strive to get IDs back to you of the humpback whales, a bit more information about who you saw in as much real time as we can. But sometimes this can take longer, especially in the peak summer months where we not only have our highest density of humpback whales, but also our highest number of sightings typically coming through. So you will get those IDs back, but it is oftentimes a lot of contributions coming through, which is so wonderful, and we will absolutely get that info back to you. But sometimes this can just take a little bit longer, but we're so grateful for everybody that contributes data, and we really couldn't do this work without you. So over to Jackie.
So yes, the exciting information that when we get back to you and we tell you BCX, BCY, BCZ, BCX UK 2024, what does that all mean? How did that all come about? So up to, importantly, just a reminder that MERS could never have known that the number of humpbacks would increase as they have on the coast. Our origin is that we wanted to know who the whales were, as did others on our coast, and we wanted to make that count. But it really is an extraordinary second chance with us having whaled humpbacks right up to 1967. Up to 2010, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, DFO, had a provincial catalog. So how that would work is that MERS and others would file in all their photos of what they thought were new whales, previously undocumented whales, to DFO. They would decide if indeed it was a new whale or not, and they would bring together all the temporary IDs of however we had recognized that whale, and would then assign a system of BC X, Y, or Z, dependent on the amount of pigmentation. But they stopped in 2010, and organizations and individuals on the coast continued doing the cataloging because, of course, you're not going to give that up. You want to know who the whales are. It's the basis of being able to work for their conservation. And then we came together as the Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration, and we'll elaborate on this later. But what this is it is coordinated by MERS, and it is supported by Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And just as well in the choice of photos here, I want to acknowledge that it was Alexander Morton in the blue, our data processing area, who was the first to have her finger on the pulse of who the humpbacks were, and that she provided us with that data to continue on. So in the system of BC, X, Y, and Z, we are referencing the fluke of the humpback. So here are two individuals that are well known to many of you, Conger and Moonstar. You're very likely aware that, yes, we catalog by the underside of the tail and get a lot of information to go on there, not just from the pigmentation, but also from the trailing edge, but that we also use the dorsal fins because so often the whales won't lift their tails, especially if they're calves, for example. But it's moved beyond that. We also catalog and recognize individual whales by the markings in their mouths. And this is related to that novel feeding strategy that some of the humpbacks sometimes use, with Conger and Moonstar having been the first two. So now, in that case, so often when they are exhibiting this behavior, feeding like this, you don't get to see their dorsal fin or their tail. So we have to rely on the markings in their mouths. But we've moved beyond that as well, where we are trying to also get pictorial fin photos and other things that would allow us to know who the whale is. You can imagine also that if a whale is entangled, that you're not going to see the underside of the tail and you have to rely on other features. So the X, Y, and Z, the cataloging number that the whales will get in British Columbia is BC for British Columbia. And then the X, Y, and Z is dependent on the amount of white or black. So someone here, like the whale on the upper right, has a lot of white. That's a BCZ. A whale that has a lot of black is a BCX, and a BCY is in between. And if you want to know the exact numbers, they are here. BCG is that the photo doesn't really allow you to know if it's an X, Y, or Z. And we do file away those photos because sometimes we can match them later on, yeah, and then give a BC, X, Y, or Z number. The BC, X, Y, or Z with a UK following it, that is the system that we adopted for in that interim phase when DFO wasn't providing the definitive cataloging numbers. So that was our way of flagging this is a whale that we haven't documented before. The UK is for unknown. So for example, if you look on the bottom right here, the whale here is a whale that hasn't previously been documented. And actually, I should be referencing the whale on the left. It's a whale that hadn't been previously documented, has largely a black-tailed fluke, was sighted in 2024, and is the 12th whale from 2024 previously undocumented, does not and has a largely black-tailed fluke. The one on the upper right, if we look at the number here, BCZ UK 2024 number 2. So this is the second largely white-tailed humpback documented in 2024 that does not have a previous ID on the coast of British Columbia. And all these UKs will be brought together under the Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration. And the whale may have been sighted in different areas and have a different temporary code. And then they're all brought together and they get a permanent code. And it is Nicole who is the mastermind and force behind that. There are also BCNFs, also our system. Yeah, that is for the non-fluking whales. So here's a horrific example, Catalyst, the poor humpback, who fully did not have a tail due to entanglement, and I'll come back to Catalyst later on. But when we have only the dorsal fin to go on, we assign an NF designation. And then very often later on, we are able to match the dorsal fin for a whale for which we have the fluke, and that gets reconciled as being a BC X, Y, or Z. I know, by the way, that this is riveting information. And there's more, because what goes on with the calves? So if, for example, it is a calf for which we know the mother, we flag in the temporary name for that calf that this is the calf of that whale. So here, for example, is a whale where we know the mum. So then the name for the calf becomes that the calf is the 2022 calf of this whale. But there's times that we know that the whale is a calf, but we don't know who the mum is. And I can well imagine that you would be asking, like, well, how do you know it's a calf then? And certainly from your data contributions, if we haven't collected the data ourselves, we don't have size to really pick up on. And what it is that the calves very often have very milky white coloration, like you see in the example here on the lower right. And there's very often mottling on the flanks of the whale. So those are clues for us to know that's a calf. We don't know the mum. So in that case, it gets a BCC designation. Why are we not just deciding that this is a Y? Yeah, because there's about an intermediate amount of white. Because the coloration in the calves, the coloration on their tails can change radically. And of course, I'll provide you with a couple of examples of that. If the calf gets seen again 2 years later, then it is given a BCX, Y, or Z, dependent on the pigmentation on the underside of their tail. So, for example, this calf, the calf for this whale, has now been given a permanent BCY designation. So, this is now BCY 1466 rather than being IOTA's calf or the mum's name and the calf 2022. Examples of how radically the coloration can change. So this was my first like awakening to how radically the fluke coloration can change. Here is Casey in the first year of his life when he was with his mom, and you can see the very white, the milky white coloration. This was Casey a couple of years later. We got the photo from Dr. John Ford, and it's like, who the heck is this whale? How could we not know who this whale is? But then what triggered was look at the trailing edge. And it was especially this marking that suddenly is like, wait, this is the same whale. So Casey had gone from looking like this to looking like this. This is why we don't decide if they're X, Y's, or Z's until 2 years after. Here's another example. Here is Casey's sibling, brother Ariel. And you could also see all this milky white coloration in the first year of his life, how it changed progressively to where he has really gone from being a Y, if not a Z, to being a BCX. So that is why we have this BCC designation as well as the X, Ys, and Zs. With the calves, we wanted to emphasize how incredibly valuable it is to get the documentation. Of course, all sightings are valuable, and in no way are we saying that additional pressure gets put on the calves, because if it is a calf, there is even legally that the distance to stay away from them is greater at 200 meters. But we did want to emphasize the challenges of knowing who the calves are later on. And Felicia will be speaking to the great value of knowing that that whale is a whale that has been born in whatever year, who its mum is, where it was, is it coming back to the same feeding area? So here are some examples of data collected last year. So in future, for Hilroy's 2024 calf, these are the photos that we have to determine if we can recognize that whale or not again. And when you consider that the modeling on the side can change, that this calf does not have a radically unique looking dorsal fin, you can imagine that this is going to be a lot of fun for Callan. Another example then, thankfully, Top Notch's calf has a very distinct white marking on the left of the dorsal fin. This is also a bit unique how there is an arch in front of the dorsal fin. So if this doesn't go away, this calf might be a little easier to recognize. But so often the calves don't lift their tails, so this is what we've got. As another example, There's only one photo for this calf, and it's a BCC, so we knew it's a calf. Look at all this modeling, but who's the mom? Yeah, and this is all we will have to work with in the future to know if there's a resighting of this individual or not. And even for whales for which we do have a fluke shot, you have now seen the examples of how much of this white could go away. This modeling on the side is very likely to fade. There's some adults that remain kind of modeled, but it's a rarity. But what has been captured here, even with this partial fluke shot, is this really unique the really unique trailing edge, and that we are more likely to be able to know who that whale is. So giving you some insight into not just the how the catalog designations take place, but also how difficult it can be. You're delivering us puzzle pieces that will allow us to know whether we have resighted that whale or not. With regards to nicknames, uh, many of you are aware that the nicknames, the protocol that in British Columbia we strive for, is that they are ideally for distinctive markings. So often it is for distinctive markings on the underside of the tail, but giving you an example here with Black Pearl, in the first year that we cited her in 2010, she did not lift her tail, just did not. But there's this tiny little white marking here. And so some children decided that the perfect name would be Black Pearl. Agreed. It's the one thing we've got to go on that makes her unique before we got a chance to look at the underside of her tail. We do not nickname for people. We don't want a nickname for behavior either, because that is not going to be unique to an individual. And when you consider that we used to not have an algorithm, these nicknames were essential to us in being able to trigger, oh yeah, it's that whale with that unique marking. I know who this is. So that was incredibly important. But from the start, we're educators as well. We wanted this to count for other people engaging with these whales as individuals and being of use to ecotourism as well, where it becomes, and many of you live this who are in ecotourism, rather than, oh, look, it's a humpback. Oh, look, it's Black Pearl. She's been here since 2010. We know her calves. We know that she goes to Hawaii. And suddenly that has gone from being a whale to being an individual. And I'll come back to that later on. Sometimes there's urgency to the nicknames. So, for example, the whale with no tail fluke, we did not want that to go into the media as just a whale. We wanted the whale to have a nickname again for what is more difficult to articulate, but the value of people knowing that that is an individual and it has a nickname. The BCNFs, because they will often be matched to another whale when we get a fluke shot rather than just a dorsal shot, they most often don't get nicknames unless there's something exceptional, like with Catalyst and trying to speak for that whale and the threat that that whale experienced in the media. And then we most often want to wait with nicknaming calves because, again, their markings can change so radically. If there is a calf, though, that has very frequent sightings, yeah, in an area where there is whale watching as well, we do understand that likely that whale should get a nickname for the things that I've already expressed and how that has greater value. We try with the calves to have their nickname reflect the lineage of the mum, but also be for a distinctive characteristic. So here we go with creative names that in this case, it's been children that have been involved with these nicknames as well. But over time, you can imagine there's only so far you can go with the theme of the Pirates of the Caribbean, so that that may not work into infinity. And then who does the nicknaming? So we do get children involved where possible, and I think it's understandable for why we do that. Local children where possible. We, in honoring, of course, the privilege of working in the territories of First Nations, that's a factor that weighs as well. We have one humpback that gets nicknamed as the result of the courses and workshops that we do, be it with First Nations, governments, or our naturalist courses. Sometimes we have online voting to get engagement and understanding that these are individual whales. Sometimes it's one of you, if it is a first sighting of that whale and we have confirmed. Sometimes there's a lag time that we have to confirm that this isn't a whale that was also seen on the Central Coast and already has a nickname. Then we go to the data contributor with those criteria of please make sure that it is for a distinctive feature. And sometimes, as the example that you see here with Aisha, there is no overt naming for a human, but there is a hidden honoring of somebody. So in this case, this is a young biologist that had a connection to people in MERS who died of a brain tumor and has a very distinctive eye-like markings on her tail. So there is an embedded honoring to her. In British Columbia, all the members of the CPHC, the people who are cataloging, have decided not to monetize this. In other parts of the world, you can pay whatever unit of money and then get the privilege of nicknaming a humpback with no controls around that. But also, we have weighed out that it is more important to do the community building, the recognition, the connection, rather than it being that we are generating money through nicknaming. And here's a couple of other examples with Wasco being a nickname that the data contributors who cited this whale for the first time wanted to be children in Haida Gwaii, close to where the whale was sighted, with all that connection, education, importance associated with it. And then in the case of Kimine, this is the result of a nickname that recently came out of a workshop we did with the Snuneymuxw peoples. So also, Callan wanted me to emphasize the great value of, you might think we want that one photo, boom, there it is. Look, it's a perfect fluke shot. You will know who this whale is and whether it's been documented or not before. Please send it all. Send it all in, because you might be providing us with a photo that lets us know that matches a whale for which we only had a dorsal fin. You could be showing the progression of scarring and healing of scarring or new scarring from entanglement or another injury. And here is a recent example then. From this photo on the left, we would not have known that Bartender had also learned to trap feed. And this was an epic encounter where Tag and Twister, we already knew they could trap feed. And the photos that we got from the series, Callan could puzzle together that indeed Bartender met the criteria. We already had photos of his mouth, thankfully, to know that this was Bartender. And then from the metadata, it could be seen that this had happened for a minimum of 4 seconds, which is the criteria for trap feeding. So Callan really wants all your photos, right, Callan? Yeah, smiling there. And just a note that we will soon be getting the 2025 catalog to you. And now I'm handing it off to Dr. Vachon.
Thank you, Jackie. So I just want to take a quick few minutes here to really much highlight how your contribution contributes to MERS research. And what better way to do that than to start with a map that includes all of MERS database citing, which includes, of course, the MERS research team, but also each and every one of you and much more. And this map not only covers a large spatial space, which is, a lot of British Columbia, but also a really long time, almost 20 years, as we have sightings here from 2001 until now. Altogether accumulating to over 28,000 sightings. Those are 28,000 times that individual humpbacks have been sighted at a specific time in a specific place. But it goes much beyond that, because those data points, as we all know, are also individuals. And they're individuals that we're slowly piecing together. We're getting more and more details about those individuals. A whale like Ripple is not only humpback whale that we see in different locations, but we know is a female, we know is a mother, we know is a grandmother. And all of that information feeds into our science and feed into our understanding of humpback whales in British Columbia. So it's incredibly valuable. And of course, those are only small examples of the amount of detail we can get. Sometimes we get association between humpback whale or specific feeding strategies like trap feeding or launch feeding. And all those things, as I mentioned, feed into our understanding, our finer understanding of humpback whales as individuals. And it very much highlights this beautiful long-term data set and the importance of this long-term data set for science. Long-term data sets allow us to study a population as individual. As is very clear with MERS, we're not only studying humpbacks as a broad species, but we're studying the individual humpbacks that live around us. It allows us to track changes over time, whether that's the whales coming back to British Columbia and how they're coming back to those waters after whaling, but also how they might react to anthropogenic changes or climate change. Long-term data sets give us the information we need to solve scientific mystery. All those details we can put into science to try to understand mechanism. Does being the mother of a different individual influence your behavior? Does it influence where you go? Does it influence what you're doing? Long-term data set like this also allow to do more powerful statistical analyses, whether that's more detailed models or, once again, like putting all this information to get more detailed answers. It also brings us closer to the truth. It gives us more certainty in our answers and what is happening. And finally, there's also evidence in the scientific literature that long-term data sets actually contribute the most to scientific publication and policy. So this data set gives us power for change. And one example into which MERS is currently using this wonderful data set that you're contributing to is with our site fidelity research project. This is a project that I'm leading and MERS just started that's looking at individual humpback site fidelity. So this idea that humpback whales come back to the same place every year, that they're not just roaming randomly around British Columbia, which I can kind of already presume a lot of us here are aware. So for this project, we're using MERS contributor data. So we're using your data alongside the MERS team research data and data from other CPHC members. So data from all across British Columbia to do a coast-wide analysis. We're looking at how humpback whale use the waters of British Columbia. Do individual humpback whale come back to the same area every year? How big is that area? How much are they moving across British Columbia? Does that change with time? Does that change with the different life stages of that whale? Do whales in different areas mix? Do we have some mixing between whales in Campbell River and whales in Northeast Vancouver Island? What about up north in BC? And how far do individual humpback whales move? How does that differ between males and female, between different areas, based on their mother's behavior? Why are they moving that way? So those are all of the questions that we're hoping to answer with this super ambitious project that is very fitting for our wonderful data set. And all of this is possible because of that long-term data set that you are contributing to. And while we're still in the very early stages of this research project, I wanted to share some preliminary finding using the MERS data that you contributed to. And those are findings regarding our neighbor Argonaut. So between 2009 and 2024, you've contributed, and MERS has contributed, over 1,500 sightings of Argonaut. And yet, most sightings are within 1.7 kilometers, which is an extremely small area, especially considering the fact that we know humpback whale can travel tens of thousands of kilometers, and they travel thousands of kilometers every year to migrate. And yet, Argonaut chooses to come back to those same 1.7 kilometers every year, which is extremely strong site fidelity. And this is what it looks like for the visual people in the audience, which I'm assuming is most people. So on the left, we have all of the MERS sighting, which I presented at the beginning. And then on the right, we have the sightings of Argonaut, which, as you can see, are very much limited to that same area. And reminder, this is 1,500 sightings. So they're very, very much concentrated on top of each other. So this is the value of submitting year after year, day after day, the same sighting of Argonaut in the same space, is that now we can say with confidence that this whale shows incredible site fidelity, that Argonaut comes back year after year to the same area to feed, that the humpback whales on our coast are not just randomly roaming the coast of British Columbia, they're coming back to areas that they know. And this matters a lot for conservation, and understanding individual site fidelity of Argonaut and other whales across BC, it actually can impact their conservation quite a bit. Our knowledge of habitat use can help highlight areas of high importance to humpback whale. If we have multiple individuals that have like that type of concentration on top of each other, we can say, oh, this is an area that's really important to not only Argonaut, but those other individuals, we should protect it. So it kind of like can help us pinpoint areas that are important to the whales. Knowledge of population dynamics and movement can also help us assess species status. So if we see that there are divides of no mixing between whales in different areas, we can maybe consider them independently for conservation. And finally, strong site fidelity can increase the vulnerability of individual to anthropogenic stressors. If we have individuals that are restricted to a very small area, it means that positive change and like conservation measures that are, very localized to that area will have a disproportionate good impact on those individual whales. But likewise, on the flip side, anthropogenic changes might have an extremely strong negative impact on them as well. So it's really important to understand that to protect humpback whales locally and nationally. And this is only one of the many MERS projects that is currently taking advantage of your long-term individual data set that you're contributing to, and it is made possible by you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Felicia. So now's the part where we combined, Jackie, Felicia, and I will do our best to cover Nicole's portion, but to talk about the province and Pacific-wide efforts and how your data is contributing directly into the larger, broader scale efforts. As mentioned, Nicole is the coordinator of the Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration. So passing it over to Jackie.
Yeah, so within the Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration, having provided the background that it used to be DFO that did the overarching cataloging, assigning, the designating the permanent X, Y, or Z number, it's now the CPHC. It is Nicole. If we haven't made it clear, Nicole is incredible in the work that she shifts here, on top of all our other work for MERS. So these are the collaborators that you see on the right. These are researchers and or catalogers with varying histories for how long they've been doing it on the coast. But we're brought together, and what we have is what we reference as data processing zones. So you've already seen our blue data processing zone. So if a sighting comes in here through any of the collaborators, it ends up coming to us. This is then the area for OceanWise up here in the purple. This is the North Coast Cetacean Society in yellow, also known as BC Whales. The green area is an overlapping area between us and BC Whales. You then have the whales of Clayoquot and Barkley, our data associates on the southwest side. And then there is also an overlap area here between humpbacks of the Salish Sea and Keda Coastal Conservation. The gray area is a bit special because this is a space where we don't have consistent long-term data contribution. So, and having looked at who's on the call, there's somebody on the call here who delivered data in the gray zone that ends up, then we share this data processing. It came to us and boom, it's another trap feeder. Yeah, so incredibly valuable to be getting data from this area. We can't emphasize it enough. So information comes in, it ultimately ends up being brought together for the purposes that Felicia will speak to.
Yes, so the overarching goal of the CPHC is to document humpback whale as individual and to collaborate on the research project for their conservation. And research project can span a whole wide range of different things. From a population standpoint, we can look at the size of the humpback whale population and its structure, specific behavior and social association between humpback whales. We're also looking at individual life history, so when they're born, whether they're male or a female, their reproductive maturity, etc. We're looking at habitat use, so the site fidelity project I just presented, as well as movement of individual shifts in the population due to changes in climate or pre-availability. We're looking at threats, so impacts like vessel strike and entanglement and their effect on humpback whale survival. And once again, all of this to really highlight the importance of collaboration and for research response and education in British Columbia.
And now I get, as the communications person, an incredible communications challenge. Because how does this all interface? Yeah, the various ways that you could be contributing your data, how does it come together? communications challenge for which we've had to make a flow chart. Yeah, that took a fair amount of work. And also wanting to acknowledge right from the start, it would be great if there was one giant app that brought together all the purposes and all the people working together with humpbacks, but that is not happening. So what happens with your data when it comes into us? You are not just giving us the where, the who, the when of the whale. You're giving us everything from scarring information, social associations, new calves. You are giving feeding strategies. There's also information about what we're trying to keep track of with when whales under certain conditions are interacting with, for example, boats, how often the whales are having calves, the other life history information. But there's also things like that it helps with us engaging with people with regards to conservation and education, and including our sponsorship program. And as you're aware of, it leads to the regional research that Felicia has given an example of, and a regional catalog. What then happens with the information is that the who the whale is, their life history information, the where were they, that all goes to the Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration. So that is brought together through the province-wide collaborative. So your data is flowing into the CPHC. The CPHC information then ends up going to the information that is about the whole North Pacific. And that is captured under what is known as happy whale. And happy whale then is the who is the whale, where is the whale, when was the whale there. And please know that the information provided to happy whale, there is a data wall, yeah, which researchers have access to and the general public does not. So it ends up going from us to happy whale. It is, of course, also an option to provide information directly to happy whale. We do benefit hugely from the use of the algorithm and also help them with the development of the algorithm. But there is a difference. If the information goes directly to happy whale, that information is informing the who, the where, the when, maybe if there was a calf, and it helps inform the algorithm. When it comes to us directly, it is informing additional information and will get to happy whale as well. So it is feeding everything from the who, the associations, the behavior, acquisition of scarring. Is this a survivor of a known entanglement or other incidents? Yeah, and many other educational and conservation purposes. But it doesn't end here, because there is also sightings information that goes to the OceanWise wonderful whale report app. So if you're using that, you are allowing there to be data collected for this whale was here on this day. That information ends up helping us as well with providing information to be able to come up with density maps, for example, and your information also feeds back to OceanWise. But if there are photos involved with that, there's a big lag time. So we are not getting information, yeah, in real time that can be of use. And I shouldn't say a big lag time, there is a lag time. There is something really important, though, to know about using the OceanWise whale report, is we use it very specifically if we see that there are cruise ships coming down Blackfish Sound, for example, because what is a byproduct of that app is that if you input the data, there is an almost real-time alert that goes out to verified large vessel traffic. So the large vessel traffic has to sign up for this, but an alert is provided to them. It's known as the Whale Report Alert System, the RAS system, and that then is giving the opportunity for slowing down, diverting course, yeah, increased vigilance. But it's also providing data about the sightings of those whales that could be coupled with where those large vessels were. So you can see how much fun we had making this flow chart. when you give us your information, it goes through to Happy Whale. It informs more detailed research, not in any way suggesting the research of Happy Whale isn't essential and important. And by using the OceanWise Whale Report app, what you're doing is also alerting verified large vessel traffic. I get to flow immediately then into the value of your sightings that goes beyond the research piece. And that is around, it is what is more difficult to articulate, the value of being able to say, who is that whale? But it's also incredibly important for response. And this is part of the value of information going directly to us and then to Happy Whale as well. As mentioned, your data that you contribute could provide information about new scars, could be a whale that we knew was involved in an incident and that we can say that the whale survived. We have been of use and strive to be of more use, that when there is, for example, an entangled whale, that we can put together a map of sightings for that whale that says this whale is usually in this area. And it is the case that if a whale is entangled, it might bolt and go somewhere else. But it does help to say, no, this is where this whale has been seen over these last weeks. Yeah, so you can imagine if Argonaut was known to be entangled, we'd know where to look. But an example that pops to mind for me was KC was entangled. And because of the sightings we got from the Campbell River area, we were able to make a map and give that to the members of the network and DFO around the Campbell River area, which did aid finding KC back. There's education as well, like with photos, like with Auger here on the right, this has a byproduct of making real to people, like, holy crap, I don't want this to happen to my boat. Yeah, oh no, look what it does in terms of material damage, but also look at what it did to a calf. So again, it's hard to articulate the value of this. It amplifies the whales as individuals, and it certainly makes very real what the risks are. And it helps to what we reference as compel compliance rather than people, I have to stay this many meters away, that there's the understanding of why, the need for the vigilance, the need of understanding the threats to the whales, but also to human safety. And here's an example on the left where, of course, as data contributors and the photos that we're getting in, there was the realization here that Vector was entangled, yeah, from looking at these photos. And it all contributes then to the understanding and mitigating of threats and the need to be studying them and trying to reduce those threats. The value of your sightings, then, here's an example that I said I would come back to, an extreme example. But in our communication, and these were all sightings that were from data contributors, the 3 known sightings of this whale without a tail, is what we strive to do is make this whale an ambassador for increasing the understanding, making very, very real, first of all, what entanglement can do to a whale. So here, the weight and or number of traps on this whale's tail slowly severed the tail. But also, what it helps people understand is a whale that is so unique. It was still lifting its tail, even though there is no fluke, on our vast coastline was only seen 3 times. It helps people understand just how vast this coastline is and how when a whale is in trouble, like if a whale is entangled, it could go undetected for a very long time. And that therefore it must be about prevention, where, of course, there's a very positive focus on when whales get disentangled, but our research supports that in the area, 50% of the whales have scarring from entanglement, and it has to be about prevention. And it emphasizes as well the great value of getting the data, because who is this whale? Yeah, what is their life history? And just because it is such a powerful example and that it did go so far, this got coverage with incredibly powerful quotes about the need to reduce the threat of entanglement. In the Seattle Times, even this one sighting that came in, the power of what it was able to communicate to people about the threat of entanglement is incredibly strong. So the value of what you give to us goes beyond research, it goes beyond response, even though, of course, this is all connected. It really is that you are aiding knowing that these whales are individuals, that they are our neighbors. It is not just a whale blundering up and down the coast. It helps build community, caring. You are citizen scientists and are making clear to your circles the value of what you are doing, the value of knowing who these whales are as individuals, the value of being eyes on the water and what can be a byproduct, for example, of ecotourism. You're helping shape best practices because if you are out there and you are getting these sightings, why would you let that be just a whale? Why wouldn't you want to speak to the value of knowing who that whale is and how you are working with researchers? It helps shape the management, even of ecotourism practices potentially. And then also, it helps shape understanding of why the whales are here. 40% of 4,000 people who cared enough to fill in a survey for us filled in the survey that they believe that the whales migrate to warmer water because that's where the food is. The food is here. And by being able to speak for the whales being here and coming back to specific areas, it makes so clear how important the waters of British Columbia are for the feeding of these giants, and that in fact they're even importing nutrients to the warmer waters. And you're also helping increase boater safety because it's a very different reality if people think that a whale is going to a straight line somewhere else, because why would they be in BC waters? Versus knowing that they are going like this, that they are feeding, and that many of them have this extraordinary site fidelity. So as an example of a recent post then, yeah, and you'll, if you're on social media, you'll see how we try to make this count. Thanks to a data contribution, yay, Black Pearl's back. We know that she migrated because she has fresh cookie cutter shark bites on her side. Yeah, and we do not have cookie cutter sharks here. She is skinny. So it gives us a chance to talk about how important the waters of BC are for feeding, because they go away, get skinny, they come back, they're hungry. And what does this do for we humans? This is really the hard part that's to articulate. What you're contributing to and what we are striving to amplify for you, because you are our community with shared values, is ultimately we want this to convert into changed boater behavior, increasing human safety. We want it to change voter behavior and consumer behavior, understanding that we have this second chance with these whales and how important our coast is to them. And that when we care about individuals, individual whales, we generally are better humans. And I've chosen to use this paraphrase, this very powerful quote, which I think captures it, because ultimately, how we treat the whales, how we care about them, is ultimately a measure of what kind of humans we're going to be. And that's what you're contributing to.
Thanks so much, Jackie. We'll now move on to a couple of questions that we have. We just have a few here, so I will definitely leave time for more to come in. But just to answer the couple that we have now, Jackie, I'll direct this one to you, but Olivia Stewart is asking and is curious, sorry, about how the calf's mother is determined. Is the calf always with the mother? Are there other whales around the calves? And what decides that that one whale is their mother?
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. So how we know, and Felicia may fill in here as well, so how we know that it is mom and calf, because very often there's the presumption by people that if there is a what appears to be a smaller humpback beside another one, like, oh, it's a mom and calf. And very, very often that's not the case. So knowing who the mom is that if we get a chance indeed to see repeat sightings, or it's one of the like the whole series of photos, like how is that that smaller individual interacting with the other can be very big clues. So it is everything from the behavior to, sorry, I'm not answering this well. It has to do with the association that gets seen. As soon as there's more whales around Olivia, so if it is, for example, in an area where there is group bubble net feeding and you're getting a whole bunch of photos of a whole bunch of whales associating together, it becomes more difficult. So from photos alone, it might be difficult. What we can pick up on is the kind of behavior that this calf is very close to the mum. In rare cases, we might even see behavior that suggests that there's nursing going on. Uh, and of course, it is also what you're helping is if there is any sort of doubt, if that individual is seen again and again and again with the same whale, we know that it's mum and calf. Felicia, I feel like I wasn't concise there. Is there anything that you would add?
Yeah, just a small thing is, and it's really good luck, but the photo on the top right of the question slide, you can see the smaller whale there, the calf, and that position is often referred to as the calf position. So like calves will often be like slightly behind the mother, and people are thinking that that's to facilitate nursing. So if a calf, like a smaller whale, is like consistently in like a similar position with the same adult female, that's usually suggesting nursing. So that's also like another kind of like clue to add to the mystery games.
And what I should mention as well, or should have mentioned, is that it does become more difficult the older the calf becomes. So we typically see, depending on the age of the calf, because there's a range, but typically like in late summer and fall, if we use the example, for example, with Claw and Auger, Auger was often much further away from the mother, and if we had not known already that that was the calf, yeah, that we might have been left with questions going, is this a calf? Yeah, and actually, Freckles last year as well, we were left with that question because the calf, almost right from the start, was further away from the mum. So in that case, we waited to see if they would reunite.
Thanks, Jackie and Felicia. We've got a couple questions here from Chuck Spillner. I will answer both of them, and please, Felicia and Jackie, jump in as needed. But Chuck has asked, is data kept on sightings of other whales, such as gray whales? So great question. We absolutely will forward data to the respective people on the BC coast that are doing cataloging efforts of said species. So for example, Chuck, if you sent in data to us of gray whales, we would forward the sighting to our colleagues over out of Tofino Ucluelet area that do cataloging and research efforts on gray whales. They are cataloged as individuals in the similar way to humpback whales. And we would put you in touch with those people and sort of establish the communications for you to continue to contribute sightings of gray whales if you had them. And also Chuck has asked, or sorry, before I move on, but anything to add, Jackie or Felicia, to that one?
I would like to express excitement about gray whales. So there is a consortium instead of collaborative. It's the language they've gone with. So as Callan mentioned, if it flows to our research associates who also catalog gray whales, via them it'll flow into to the PCFG, which is a consortium of those cataloging gray whales. So it works the same way. And also, we're excited because our data collection efforts are going to expand next year on the northwest side of Vancouver Island. And this will also include being of use to our gray whale research colleagues, where we will be contributing whatever photos we get from them. So if gray whales come in through us or of any other species, we will channel those to those who are doing that work. And there's an increased interest in gray whales because they are very likely the advice that they be recognized as three different populations and be managed where two of them are endangered is very likely going to be accepted by the government, which means that there will also be more research going into them. Where it was perceived before it was one population, now three, of which two would be recognized as endangered, which means that more knowledge and conservation is required.
Thanks, Jackie. And then Chuck, to answer your second question of if video recordings are useful, and this is in general, not specific to gray whales, they can absolutely be useful. They can provide looking at a full encounter of what behaviors might be demonstrated that we can't quite pick up on from photos. Even if they are phone videos and from further away, we'll do our absolute best to identify who that whale is as an individual. But if we cannot confirm an ID, it's still an extremely valuable data point, as it shows that there's a humpback whale here when you provide that date, location, time, and so forth. So all the data that you can provide is really so valuable in so many different ways.
But I will jump in here as well. Screen grabs of videos to try to ID humpbacks suck. Yeah. So it is that if you could, so it is incredibly valuable. And also from a conservation perspective, yeah, video that we might be able to use to create engagement. Yeah, taken, of course, from the legal distances. But if that's all we have and we do not have a photo as well, it can be incredibly difficult to ID a humpback from a video, I think is fair, Callan.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for jumping in there. Next question we have from Matt Emig. Pardon me if I pronounce your surname wrong, but this is going to be answered by Felicia and Jackie. But the question is that Matt's been using his hydrophone in December and noticed that several humpbacks are singing and vocalizing here. Because they do not mate in these water, do you have an idea of what these vocalizations indicate?
Yeah, so we like to put things in boxes as human, with like whales singing and mating in the south, and or like lower hemisphere and higher hemisphere only feeding. The reality is that it's much more complicated than that. And there's actually more and more research on what is called song ontogeny. So like how humpback whales start to sing. Like it's often like quite different than the final songs that they end up singing on the breeding ground. And in British Columbia, and especially in Northeast Vancouver Island, we can actually start hearing the humpback singing in the fall. And if you're interested, Orca Lab has hydrophones that are live, and you can often, like in the evenings in the fall, start hearing the humpback singing, which is amazing. So there is singing on the feeding ground. It's often slightly different than what's happening on the breeding ground, and there's lots of interest and research going into this. So we'll know more in the future as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to emphasize just from an education standpoint that there is some misinformation drifting around where, oh, so the humpbacks, because there's still some of them here in the winter, and hey, there's song, that means that they're not migrating. There might be a few individuals where we can prove that by having enough sightings to know they didn't have the time to migrate, but there are staggered departures, staggered returns, so that some of them are just leaving really late, like clearly the ones, Matt, that you're getting the recordings of, and it's probably the same whales over and over again. And I can imagine how exciting that would be to document. So that's and why later in the fall, like why aren't they singing the whole time? It is only the males who sing, and it must be a hormonal shift where they are not just thinking about feeding all the time, but that they are thinking of whatever role the song has as it relates to mating when they migrate.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie and Felicia. Next question we've got is from Daryl Liscombe, and this one I'll lob to Jackie. But Daryl's wondering, is there any evidence from the data of mother-calf associations later in their lives after they have separated after a year?
Yeah, it's a great interest, and I can imagine that Felicia may have information to add here as well. So, Daryl, with you having like so many wonderful sightings, including from land around Malcolm Island, you know the site fidelity of these whales. Yeah, so that the calves are generally coming back to where their mums taught them to feed. And for our area, which we can speak to specifically, is even though you get the likes of Stitch coming back to where she learned to feed with Slash, we did not see associations between them. And but that's for our area specifically. And we also might be missing quite a lot because the whales are not group feeding in this area. They're usually feeding in during the day, and maybe they are associating at night. So this is part of the site fidelity, like a layer of interest to this is when we bring together the picture for the whole coast, what is happening in terms of those long-term associations between mums and calves. But the state of knowledge right now is that it is a rarity, even though you've got the lineage of mother and calves coming back to the same area, that there don't appear generally to be long-term associations between them, but really layering on the caveat that there might be a lot that we're missing, but it is exactly to the point of all this data coming together from so many people over such a broad area where feeding strategies are different, where we may know more. And also generally, like globally for humpbacks, it is not seen that there are these long-term associations between mums and calves.
I just want to add two small things here. The first one is that we are like looking at that question with the site fidelity research project, so we'll have more to talk about in the future. But we're looking at not only whether the calves come back to the same area as the mother, but whether like the size of that area, like the way they use that area is similar between mother and calves, which I think will be really interesting because you might have a scenario, well, if a mother has a very small range, then maybe the calf also has a very small range, but somewhere different, right? So we're also looking at this, but we will know better. And to kind of highlight once again the data set is that in order to ask those questions, we need to know who the mothers are, who the calves are, and we need to like be able to follow those calves not only through their calf life but also as adult, right? So you kind of need this like, and humpback whales are long-lived animals, so you need like this really long data set to be able to even get at those questions. So there's a lot of interesting things that will come out of this data set, but they're questions that we weren't able to have answer to before that we're hoping to get at in the future. So yeah.
So many questions, like Casey and Ariel, two brothers, didn't used to hang out together. Yeah, there is no twinning. They are separated by years. But then for years upon years, they were most often seen together. And now they're not seen together very often. So this is the thing that I know makes Felicia's heart go pitter-pat more than anything else, is these kinds of questions around the social associations.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. For now, that was what we've got for questions. So I will move on, but if we have time for more questions at the end and if we see them pop.
We have more, Callan.
Oh,
Just so you
sure.
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a second page.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. My mistake. Okay. Alrighty, I've got a question here from James Wilson. This one is to me. What's the easiest way to transfer files, especially larger files, to me? So that's a really, really good question. In my next slide, I actually cover a bit more in depth the data contribution methods itself and how you can contribute a variety of ways. But just to answer this one, the best way for really large files would either be through a shared folder that I would set you up with on MERS side of things in Google Drive or Dropbox, or through WeTransfer. So there are a few different options. It really depends how regular of a data contributor you might be, and what we would look at that would best suit you as well. So I'll leave that one there, and I will be touching a bit more on data contribution methods in the next slide. And then we've got a question from Jeff Reynolds. So this one is, let's see here. So Jeff is asking, if half of our funding comes from the public sector and you benefit from public contributions to the photo ID catalog, are you as an organization required to provide anything to the general public, such as publicly accessible database of humpback whales in the area like DFO used to provide? It appears that OceanWise also provides a humpback whale catalog for free online and states their funding is received from DFO. So Jackie, I'll lob this one to you with regards to catalogs.
Could you reread the beginning of the question? Because
Sorry. Yeah.
if I heard it properly, it's that we get funding from the public?
So if funding comes from the public sector and you benefit from public contributions to the photo ID catalog.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. No, is the answer. So OceanWise may choose to have a publicly free catalog as a way to engage with contributors, for example, but there's nothing for them either that guides that they have an obligation to do so. So a difference is, for example, that if data is contributed to Fisheries and Oceans Canada and a catalog is made by Fisheries and Oceans Canada of Bigg's killer whales or resident killer whales, that is because it was done by the government, it is funded by taxpayers. So you would not be able to monetize those catalogs if those catalogs are made by the government, because it is like double dipping into the. So I think hopefully, Jeff, that I'm like answering in the direction of what you're asking, but there is none of that for not-for-profits. There is no obligation or funding associated with what you're doing, other than what you are doing is beyond what we would ever be able to do, yeah, as a not-for-profit. So what you're doing absolutely has value, and you could argue it has monetary value, because if we had to go on the water to try to get this data, there would need to be more of us. There would need to be more money. We would also be creating more noise and burning more fossil fuels. But there is no obligation, and if anything, I think most of you have a sense of, like, for example, how few of us there are in MERS and how much work we are striving to do. We simply wouldn't have the resources either to be, and things would get pretty messy if we were paying for people to get data for us. The ideal for us, we're not wanting to send people on the water. We want this to be a byproduct of people who are already on the water.
And if I can add quickly here as kind of like an added value, and that's something that I see Callan do all the time, and like the amount of work that she puts into like providing the IDs of the data that is contributed to MERS, I think also kind of like gives back in a similar way, right? Of like, if you contribute us data, like you will know who the whales that you are seeing are, like you'll get kind of like that piece as well, which is great.
Thank you so much, Felicia, because I absolutely should have mentioned this. This is supposed to be reciprocation. Yeah, we want you to know who the whales are, and this is to everybody. There is more, potentially, you could argue, immediate value if it's somebody who is on a whale watching boat and they only have those people for 3 hours or for 3 days. We want you as soon as possible to know, look, this is the whale that you saw, this is their life history. But also for individuals who are already on the water, being, for example, James, a water taxi operator. Yeah, the more that you know about who these individuals are, it is everything from enriching the value for you, your connection, but also it is investing directly into the data contributors, into what they understand and everything of the movements of these whales onward as well. So it's absolutely supposed to be reciprocation, but not monetary.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie and Felicia. I'm going to leave it at that with our questions. And again, as I mentioned before, if we do have time at the end, I will add any more that come in through there. But thank you for wonderful questions as well. And moving on, we are, as I mentioned, answering James's question. I just wanted to talk about our data contribution methods. So just to review sort of the process of this, especially with consideration that of the question that did come up. Everybody here on the call has contributed data in one way or another. And I just wanted to talk quickly about what those different avenues can look like. So bchumpbacks.com, starting with that one, is the one and only website of the Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration. So this is a place where you can submit humpback whale data from anywhere in coastal BC. There is a map on this website that has the map that Jackie spoke to earlier, that's divided into the different colors and zones for the respective people cataloging humpback whales in that area. And you would click on that zone and submit data through there. I do have a very short video in the next slide about how to use bchumpbacks.com. You can also submit data directly to MERS through our website, through the humpback whale data form. And then I also have had communications with people through data at email address, and this is typically used for incidental and less frequent sightings occurring. And next up, we do have a lot of people on the call that are also more frequent contributors, and they have either a Google Drive or Dropbox shared folder set up. So this is something I mentioned when answering James's question, but this is with regards to people that either have really large files, they have a lot of data to contribute, or regular data to contribute. We will get you set up with a shared folder. On our side of things, we set that up with you, and it can be through Google Drive or Dropbox. And the idea behind this is it allows you to upload photos more at your own time. And it also includes a data table in there, which is a working document that allows you to upload all of your sightings information. And it has a space for us to include the IDs of the whales you saw, and a bit more information about them as well. So if you have any questions about how to continue to contribute data, if you'd like to change up the current method that you use, I'd love to get you set up with some folders as well, as to help keeps things nice and tidy. And I will have my contact at the end as well, and in the follow-up email, should you have more questions there. So this is just the quick video of how to use the CPHC website. Before I play here, I will slow it down a second. So once you get onto the website, you'll see that colorful map of coastal BC where it's divided into the different data processing areas. And what you would do is click on that respective area and click on the link in the pop-out, and that'll direct you automatically to the data contributors, or sorry, to the organization's page or email of how you can contribute data, and then you would get in touch with them through there. And so now just to review as well, what information we require when you are submitting humpback whale data, now that you have a better understanding of how your data is being used. So we do recommend at least 200 meters to make sure that you are outside of the regulations, the minimum avoidance distance away, especially if you're reviewing a humpback whale mother and calf, and or a resting whale. So if you're unsure, it's best to be on the outside of those avoidance regulations. The best is to photograph the underside of the tail, the fluke area, and or the dorsal fin. The ideal is to document both and to send it all, as Jackie demonstrated earlier, of just how valuable full photo sequences can be and what can be learned from them, and how we can often match maybe a dorsal fin to a fluke later throughout the summertime or as more sightings come in. To make sure that your sighting is counting for research and conservation purposes, we do really need the date, time, location, ideally GPS coordinates, as this will help with the sighting itself with the data processing. There is a way that you can add GPS coordinates into your camera settings, so it could be something worth looking into if you don't have that set up already. And of course, the photographer name. And for data processing purposes, we do ask that you don't change the file names, just to keep things clean as they come off your camera, and let us do the work from there. And I will mention here as well, a thank you to everybody that's filled in the Google survey form that I shared with everybody in my initial email to you all in the new year. This survey was regarding photo credit and how best to photo credit you for cataloging purposes. So if you haven't yet filled that in, we will also include a link to that survey in the follow-up email at the end of the webinar. So before we go here, there's additional ways to contribute to MERS. We've got some current things going on right now that you might have seen on our social media. First up, we have our How Wild photo and video contest, and we would love your photos in there, especially would love your videos. The deadline is March 31st, so we've only got a few days left. But if you are interested in participating, please find more information on our social media and or our website as well. And then next up in April, we have MERS annual online auction happening from April 10th to 13th. You can see a little sneak peek of some of the ocean themed goodies in this year's auction. But again, if you'd love to participate or you're curious to learn more about it, you can find more info on our social media. So before we go, I just want to say on behalf of Team MERS, thank you so much for not only contributing your invaluable humpback whale data to us, but also taking the time to spend time with us today just to learn about how your data contributions are contributing to MERS's research. We really hope that you enjoyed the webinar. Again, it was the first of its kind of doing an exclusive event for data contributors such as yourselves. If you do have any more questions, data related or not, please do reach out to me. My contact is on the screen here. And we'll also be sending out that email at the end of the webinar with the link to the recording available for 1 week for data contributors only, a link to that Google survey, and again, contact information should you have more questions, data related or not. But on behalf of Team MERS, thank you so much.